Picture a small terracotta saucer sitting on a sunlit kitchen table. Inside it, a tiny hillside of bright green wheatgrass, 3 little twig crosses tied with twine, and a miniature clay pot on its side with a smooth stone rolled away from the opening. It looks like something from a fairy garden, but this little diorama is actually telling a story that goes back over 2,000 years. And the tradition of building it? That part stretches back over 700 years to medieval English cathedrals, stone carvings, and candlelit ceremonies that have been almost completely forgotten. This is the Easter garden, sometimes called a resurrection garden. And whether you're an experienced gardener looking for a meaningful spring project or a parent wanting to do something with the kids that goes a little deeper than chocolate eggs, this is one of the most beautiful seasonal traditions you'll ever try. So let's start with where this whole thing comes from, because the history is honestly wild. Walk into certain medieval English churches today, places like Heckington in Lincolnshire, and you'll spot something unusual carved into the stone wall, an arched recess, almost like a built-in shelf, cut right into the north side of the church. These are Easter sepulchres, and some date back to the 1200s and the 1300s. Here's what they were used for. Every Good Friday, the parish priest would wrap a crucifix and the consecrated bread in linen cloth, then ceremonially place them inside this stone recess in front of the whole congregation, sealing it, burying them symbolically. Parishioners kept vigil through the night, and on Easter morning, the cross was lifted out while church bells rang and the choir sang hymns of resurrection. It was theatrical, emotional, and deeply physical. People didn't just hear about the resurrection, they watched it happen in stone and candlelight. But the Reformation swept all of that away. The ceremonies were banned, many sepulchres were destroyed. That tactile connection to the Easter story largely disappeared for centuries. Fast forward to 1939. Mrs. John Allen, wife of the rector at St. Michael's Church in the village of Harbledown near Canterbury, built a miniature garden scene inside the church depicting the empty tomb of Christ, surrounded by living plants and flowers. Real soil, real greenery. As far as historians can trace, it was the first modern Easter garden. People loved it. Cecil Hunt, writing in his 1954 book about British customs, described the Harbledown Garden as attracting thousands of visitors from far away. Then in 1955, St. Paul's Cathedral in London installed a major Easter garden with silver birch trees, daffodils, and primroses. When the most famous cathedral in England does something, people notice. The tradition spread quickly, Anglican churches first, then Methodist and Catholic congregations. By the 2000s, American evangelicals and homeschooling families had embraced it, usually calling them resurrection gardens. And then Pinterest and craft blogs turned a beautiful church tradition into something anyone could build on their kitchen table for under $10. But here's what makes Easter gardens different from, say, a wreath on your door or colored eggs on your lawn. Every single element in this little diorama means something. And once you know the symbolism, building one becomes a completely different experience. The centerpiece is the tomb, a small terracotta pot laid on its side with the opening visible. That empty interior represents the burial chamber that Joseph of Arimathea provided for Jesus, as described in the Gospel of John, chapter 19. The emptiness is the entire point. On Good Friday, some families place a small figure wrapped in cloth inside. On Easter morning, they remove it and roll the stone away. The smooth river rock beside the tomb recalls the great stone from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28. 3 crosses stand on top of the hill, the tallest in the center, representing the crucifixion at Calvary from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23. And then there's the living greenery. That's not decoration. The Gospel of John states the tomb was in a garden. The theological arc runs from the Garden of Eden through the Garden of Gethsemane to this garden tomb where everything was made new. Even the growing seeds carry meaning. John chapter 12 verse 24 says that unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a single seed. But if it dies, it produces much fruit. When you watch wheatgrass push through bare soil in your Easter garden, you're watching that verse come to life. Okay, so now you know the history and the meaning behind every piece, but what does it actually take to create one of these miniature gardens? The beauty of the tradition is its simplicity. The materials are almost comically humble. A shallow terracotta plant saucer, about 10 to 16 inches across, serves as the landscape. A small clay pot becomes the tomb. A smooth river rock plays the sealed stone. A handful of pebbles form the pathway. 3 twigs bound with twine become the crosses of Calvary. Potting soil, moss or grass seed, and a spray bottle round it out. The whole thing typically costs under $10, especially when the twigs and stones come from the backyard. The costs are truly modest. The construction follows a pattern that's been repeated in homes and churches for decades now. The small pot goes on its side in the center of the saucer, and moist soil gets packed around it to form a hillside, leaving the pot opening visible as the empty tomb. The river rock sits beside the entrance. Pebbles trace a pathway leading up to it. The 3 twig crosses go into the hilltop, center one tallest. Then comes the greenery, and this is where the garden truly comes alive. Wheatgrass has become the go-to choice because it germinates in just 2 to 3 days and fills in completely within about 10 days. Experienced builders soak their wheat berries first in a mixture of water, vinegar, and a little hydrogen peroxide to prevent the mold that plagues first-timers. Regular grass seed works too, but it needs 2 to 3 weeks of lead time. Cress, a classic in British Easter gardens, sprouts in 3 to 5 days. For those who want instant results, sheet moss pressed over the soil gives beautiful coverage with no waiting at all. And many builders combine both, using moss as a green base and tucking live flowering plants into the scene for color. The little details are where these gardens go from simple to stunning. Some builders paint their tomb pot with gray craft paint so it looks like stone instead of orange terracotta. Others use rose stems with thorns for the crosses, a nod to the crown of thorns that adds visual texture. A sprig of upright rosemary tucked behind the hill makes a surprisingly convincing miniature tree. The plant choices people make for these miniature landscapes are fascinating because many of them carry their own Easter symbology. Baby tears, a ground cover with impossibly tiny bright green leaves, has become a favorite because at miniature scale it looks exactly like a lush lawn. Irish moss and elfin thyme serve the same purpose. Primroses show up in Easter gardens constantly, and for good reason. The name literally means first rose, and they've symbolized spring and renewal for centuries. Miniature daffodils like the tete-a-tete variety are sometimes called Lenten lilies and represent new life rising from winter. And the Easter lily, that white trumpet-shaped bloom found in churches every April, has been the defining Easter flower for over a century, representing purity and resurrection. Succulent Easter gardens have become a whole trend on their own. Sempervivum and small sedum varieties thrive in shallow containers with barely any water, giving the gardens a modern, almost sculptural look that lasts for months. One of the reasons Easter gardens have spread so fast is how naturally they work as a family tradition. Every element in the build maps to a piece of the Easter story, which turns assembly into interactive storytelling without it ever feeling like a lesson. Families with small children often let the little ones pat the soil, sprinkle the seeds, and place the stones while a parent narrates the story. Older kids tend to take ownership of the whole project, binding twig crosses with twine, writing Bible verses on flat stones with markers. Some families have gone an entirely different direction with Lego resurrection gardens, building hollow brick hills with tomb chambers inside and rolling stone mechanisms. Those have become a hit at church Easter fairs. But the approach that seems to resonate the deepest is the progressive Holy Week build. Instead of assembling the whole garden at once, families add one element each day through the week before Easter, reading the matching Bible passage together as they go. On Good Friday, the stone seals the tomb, and on Easter morning, the whole family gathers around the little garden on the kitchen table and rolls it away together. Some families write worries or struggles on small pebbles and bury them at the bottom of the garden before adding soil. A tactile devotional practice that kids remember for years. The tradition has even produced eatable spin-offs. Resurrection cookies are meringues that go into a sealed oven overnight, and on Easter morning, each cookie is hollow inside, just like the empty tomb. Resurrection rolls use crescent dough wrapped around marshmallows that melt away during baking, leaving them hollow. Both have become beloved Easter morning traditions in their own right. The gardens themselves are surprisingly resilient. A living wheatgrass version stays beautiful for 3 to 5 weeks, with nothing more than a daily mist from a spray bottle and a spot near a bright window. Moss-based gardens last much longer. And one of the nicest details of the tradition is that families save their clay pots, stones, and crosses from year to year, refreshing the soil and seeds each spring. The components become tiny heirlooms that accumulate meaning every time the garden gets rebuilt. From a detailed moss and primrose centerpiece on a dining room table, to a quick wheatgrass project on a Saturday afternoon with the kids, to a Lego scene at a church fair, these miniature gardens all share the same thread. They connect medieval stone carvings in English cathedrals to ordinary kitchen tables around the world. And that connection between ancient tradition and living green things, between soil and a story that is 2,000 years old, is what makes this one of the most beautiful Easter traditions you'll find anywhere. If you're finding this helpful, hit subscribe. I cover gardening projects and seasonal traditions.